welcome back. Another day for you, the same day for me. So, are you ready for the next chapter? What's going to happen to Samson? Is he going to be able to get out of the house or not? And why are all those other dogs there? Have you figured out who the bad men are and what they're doing? All right, so are you ready? Here we go. Mark sighed. Well, maybe you'd better start hunting for that teddy bear of Tommy's, he said. It's been an awful long time now. All those posters we handed out, said Corey. Didn't anyone read them? Maybe our special was too cheap, Maria Dolores suggested. Nobody's taking us seriously. Mark shot a rubber band across the room and opened the notebook again. I wonder how Dad... Someone's coming, Corey interrupted. He scrambled to his feet. Mark hurried to the edge of the loft. Footsteps approached the garage. Then Mrs. Connolly spoke from the open doors below. There's someone here to see you, Mark. And you too, kids. Mark grabbed the rope that hung from the garage rafters and swung down. He landed on his feet beside his mother. She flinched. If you miss, you'll land right on me, she said. Why don't you use the ladder like Maria Dolores and Corey? Because I beat them to the rope, Mark replied. What's up, Mom? It's my Samson, said Miss Walsack. She stepped inside beside Mrs. Connolly. She leaned heavily on her cane. He's gone. Come to think of it, I haven't seen him today either, Mark said surprisingly. I remember feeding him, it was last night, wasn't it, Mom? That's when we had shrimp for supper. His mom nodded. We saved him a piece. She looked at Maria Dolores and Corey. You haven't seen him either? Not lately, Corey said. I'm sorry, Inga, Mrs. Connolly said. Maybe the kids could ask around the neighbors for you. Yes, Mark said. We'd be glad to. The crime busters would, I mean. His mother looked puzzled. Crime busters? Mrs. Walsack handed her a bright yellow paper. Mark recognized it as one of their posters. Yes, the crime busters. The grocery boy gave this flyer to me when he brought my order, she smiled. You know, I haven't heard that name since your daddy was about your age. Mark? Why, I remember the time he found an old sword that was stolen from the carriage house, and the time he discovered who was playing tricks on old man Evans. The minute I saw the poster, I knew I needed a crime buster just like your dad. Crime buster? My Jonathan? Mrs. Conley sounded surprised. Mrs. Walsack nodded, shifted her weight on the cane. I always thought that experience with fighting crime as a youngster was responsible for his career in law, you know. Mark grinned. He tucked a hand under Mrs. Walsack's arm. Why not discuss the details in comfort? The two other crime fighters followed them back into the house. Mark controlled his impatience until his mother was settled. Mrs. Walsack comfortably was seated in the wing chair as well. Then he asked, What makes you think Samson isn't just visiting around? That is what he normally does, isn't it? He's always come home, Mrs. Walsack's voice shook slightly. He may roam at night, but early in the morning he scratches at the door. Or in good weather, I'll find him sleeping on the porch. He never stays away for a long time. He knows how much I need him. So he hasn't come home since Monday night? Mark tried for a professional tone. Maria Dolores's eyebrows soared closer to her hairline, and her dark eyes sparkled with anticipation. "No, this morning I had a meeting at church. He wasn't home by the time I had to leave," Mrs. Walsack replied. "I've never gone off without letting him in." "You don't think someone took him, do you?" Mrs. Connolly asked. "Samson? Who'd want?" Corey began. A swift jab from Maria's elbow cut him off in mid-sentence. "I doubt it," Mark said. "He probably just wandered off again." "But he would have to come back sometime," Mrs. Walsack said. "Did you notify anyone? I mean, besides us?" Mark asked. "Well, I called Pastor Jim and asked him to put a notice in this Sunday's bulletin, and yesterday I talked to Sheriff Hadley. He wasn't the least bit interested in helping me find him," Mrs. Walsack sniffled. "Said he was helping the Inglewood police chief on a case and he didn't have time." Mrs. Connolly patted her shoulder. "It'll be all right, Ingrid," she said. "Samson will turn up. Just you wait and see." "But I thought," Marky began. "I'm not saying that you can't help, Mark," Mrs. Connolly said. "I don't think anyone will mind if the crime busters return for a while." "But yes," sorry, I lost my place. "Yes," Mark leaped to his feet, knocking over Mrs. Walsack's cane. Maria Dolores caught it, gave it a few baton twirls, and returned it to its owner with a flourish. Mrs. Walsack laughed shakily at their enthusiasm. Mrs. Conley looked thoughtful for a minute. Then she said, "There are many people in our neighborhood and at church who have small problems that are unnoticed because they don't affect other people. They need help, and I think you three can give it to them. Helping other people shouldn't end up in the kind of trouble your last adventure did anyway." "You're right," Mark said. "When do we start?" We'll talk it over first with your dad, okay?" She smiled at him. Mrs. Walsack put her handkerchief away, "and of course, if you are allowed to search for Samson, and if you find him for me, there will be a reward." She stood slowly to her feet. "Since the sheriff couldn't help me, I placed an ad in the Gazette offering $25 for information to Samson," she said. "I'll raise it to $50 if you can locate him for me." Mark nodded, trying to listen and think at the same time. His mind was racing along the route that Samson followed every night. He reached for a pencil stub he had tucked into his notebook and opened his father's old notebook. Carefully he wrote, "Case 1. Now let's see, Mrs. Walsack. Samson comes by our house at about—" Corey pulled a tissue from the pack he carried in his backpack. He blew his nose and sank back into his chair. He grinned, and then he said, "Still bored, Mark?" And that is the end of our chapter 4. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.